The rain had stopped, just minutes before I arrived. Water still dripped, from the white roses, lining the entrance of the luxury wedding hall. Every guest stepping out of their expensive cars, looked polished, elegant, important. And then, there was me. A wrinkled brown coat. Old shoes, with fading soles. A handbag, that had been stitched together, 3 different times. I stood near the entrance for a moment, clutching the wedding invitation, with trembling fingers. My daughter was getting married. My only daughter. The little girl I raised alone. The child I worked night shifts for. The girl I skipped meals for. The same daughter, who once hugged me, and promised, "Mom, one day I'll give you the happiest life." But as I stepped toward the entrance, one of the security guards blocked my path. "Staff entrance is around the back." I blinked. "I'm not staff," I said softly. He looked me up and down. His eyes paused, at my worn coat. Then at my shoes. Then, at my face. "You're here for the wedding?" "Yes." "Which side?" "The bride's side." Before I could say another word, a familiar voice cut through the air. Cold. Sharp. Embarrassed. "Mom." I turned. And there she was. My daughter. Standing beneath crystal lights, in a beautiful white dress. But the moment her eyes landed on my clothes, her smile disappeared. And that was the exact moment I realized something inside my daughter had changed. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 58 years old. And for 25 years, my entire world revolved around one person. My daughter. Emily. There was a time when our apartment was filled with laughter. Tiny shoes near the doorway. Cartoons playing too loudly in the mornings. Crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. And a little girl with messy curls, who believed her father hung the moon. Emily was only 6 years old when everything fell apart. Too young to understand betrayal. Too innocent to recognize abandonment. The morning her father left, felt completely normal. That's the cruel thing about life sometimes. The worst days often begin like ordinary ones. I remember standing in the kitchen making pancakes while Emily sat at the table swinging her little legs back and forth. Her father walked over, kissed the top of her head, and smiled. "Be good for mommy today, princess." Emily giggled. "Bring me candy when you come home." He laughed softly. "Maybe I will." Then he grabbed his car keys, looked at me for less than a second, and walked out the front door. I didn't know it then. But that was the last normal moment of my life. By evening, he was gone. No phone call. No explanation. No goodbye. Just silence. At first I thought something terrible had happened. An accident. A robbery. Anything. I called hospitals. Police stations. Friends. Nothing. Then I noticed the kitchen drawer was open. The one where we kept bank documents. My stomach dropped immediately. I rushed to the bedroom. Half his clothes were gone. The suitcase was missing. And sitting on the kitchen table, beneath Emily's school drawing, were divorce papers. I remember my hands shaking so badly, the papers slipped onto the floor. My entire body felt cold. Like the air had disappeared from the room. And then Emily walked into the kitchen holding her stuffed rabbit. "Mom." I turned around quickly, trying to wipe my tears before she saw them. But children always notice tears. Always. "Why are you crying?" she asked softly. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because how do you explain abandonment to a child who still believes bedtime stories are real? That night she stood near the window waiting for headlights outside. Every few minutes she would peek through the curtains hopefully. "Daddy's late," she whispered. I sat beside her, barely holding myself together. Hours passed. Then finally she looked at me and asked the question that shattered my heart. "Mom, when is Daddy coming home?" I lied. I smiled the way mothers do when they're breaking inside. "Soon, sweetheart." But deep down, I already knew. He wasn't coming back. The next few months were the hardest of my life. Not because I missed my husband. By then, the pain had turned into numbness. No. The hardest part was fear. Pure fear. The kind that keeps you awake at night staring at the ceiling. The fear of eviction notices. Empty refrigerators. Unpaid bills. The fear of hearing your child say, "I'm hungry," and not knowing what to give her. I worked everywhere I could. Morning shifts at a bakery. Afternoons cleaning office buildings downtown. Night shifts at a nursing home changing sheets and helping elderly patients bathe. Some nights, I slept less than 2 hours. I would come home at dawn, shower quickly, braid Emily's hair for school, then head to another job before my body even stopped aching from the last one. There were weeks when my hands cracked from chemicals and cold weather. Weeks when my feet bled through my shoes. But every evening before Emily came home, I forced myself to smile in the mirror. Because children should not carry adult burdens. At least, that's what I believed. I remember one Christmas when I couldn't afford gifts. I sat alone in the kitchen after Emily fell asleep, staring at $23 on the table. That was all I had left for the week. $23. I cried silently into my hands because I couldn't even buy my daughter the toy she wanted. The next morning Emily ran into the kitchen excitedly holding a folded piece of paper. "Look, Mommy." It was her Christmas list. But instead of toys, she had written, "New shoes for Mommy. Medicine so Mommy stops coughing. Pancakes every Sunday." I had to turn away so she wouldn't see me crying. Because children notice more than adults think. Much more. And despite all my efforts, Emily eventually began noticing the cracks in our life. One winter evening she came home from school unusually quiet. Her cheeks were red from crying. She avoided my eyes completely. "Emily?" I asked gently. No answer. She walked straight into her bedroom and locked the door. A few minutes later I heard muffled sobbing through the wall. I sat outside her door for nearly an hour before she finally spoke. Very softly. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetheart." A long silence followed. Then her tiny voice broke. "A girl at school laughed at my coat today." I closed my eyes. Emily continued quietly. She said it looked like something from a thrift store. Every word felt like a knife. Not because of the coat. Because children can be cruel without understanding the damage they cause. Then came the question. The question I had feared for years. "Mom, are we poor?" I leaned my forehead against the door and started crying silently. Not because we were poor. But because my daughter was finally old enough to see it. And once a child sees struggle, you can never fully hide it again. I took a deep breath before answering. "Yes. Right now we are." The room stayed quiet. Then I whispered the one thing I needed her to remember forever. But poverty isn't shameful. Cruelty is. For a moment there was only silence. Then slowly, the bedroom door opened. Emily stood there with tears running down her cheeks. She looked so small. So hurt. So scared. And before I could say another word, she wrapped her tiny arms around me. "I'll become successful one day," she whispered. I'll buy you a beautiful house. I held her tightly. So you never have to work again, she said through tears. And I'll take care of you forever. That night, sitting on the floor beside my little girl, I truly believed love could survive anything. And for years, I believed her. Emily changed after college. Not all at once. Slowly. Like someone quietly drifting away, while pretending nothing had changed. At first, it was small things. She stopped inviting me to events with her new friends. She corrected the way I spoke, in restaurants. And whenever I mentioned my job at the nursing home, she changed the subject quickly. I tried not to think too much about it. Because when you love someone deeply, you become an expert at ignoring the things that hurt you. The first time I truly felt the distance between us was during her law school graduation. I had saved money for months to buy a navy blue dress for that day. Nothing expensive. Just simple and elegant. I remember standing in front of the mirror before leaving home, smoothing the wrinkles from the fabric with nervous hands. I wanted to look nice, for my daughter. I wanted her to feel proud of me. When Emily walked across the stage holding her diploma, I cried immediately. Not soft tears. The kind that come from years of exhaustion, finally meaning something. Because every overtime shift, every unpaid bill, every sleepless night, suddenly felt worth it. My little girl had made it. After the ceremony, her classmates gathered around taking pictures. Everyone looked polished, successful, important. Expensive heels. Designer suits. Perfect smiles. Emily walked toward me, and introduced me quickly. This is my mother. That was it. No hug. No warmth. No pride in her voice. Just, introduction. Then one of her classmates smiled and asked, "So what does your mom do?" Emily hesitated. Just for a second. But mothers notice hesitation. Always. Then she answered carefully. She worked in healthcare. Worked. Past tense. As if she was embarrassed to admit. I still cleaned rooms at the nursing home. I smiled anyway. Pretended not to notice. Because mothers survive, by swallowing heartbreak quietly. Then came Daniel. Her fiancé. Tall. Confident. Perfectly dressed, all the time. The son of a wealthy real estate developer. The kind of man who shook hands, like he was doing people a favor. The first time Emily brought him to my apartment, I spent the entire day cooking. Roast chicken. Mashed potatoes. Apple pie. I even bought fresh flowers for the table, even though I couldn't really afford them. I wanted everything to feel warm. Respectable. Good enough. Daniel smiled politely when he walked inside, but I caught the look in his eyes. That quick glance around the apartment. The old furniture. The tiny kitchen. The peeling paint near the hallway. Then he smiled, and said, "Cozy place." That word stayed with me. Cozy. Rich people use it, when they don't want to say small. Or poor. During dinner. Daniel barely touched the food. But Emily laughed at everything he said, like he was the most impressive man in the world. And the strangest part was, she seemed different around him. More careful. More polished. Like she was trying very hard to belong in his world. I ignored the warning signs, because she looked happy. And mothers will tolerate almost anything, if their child is smiling. But Daniel never really looked at me, like I mattered. Not as a person. More like part of the apartment. Something old, in the background. Months later. Emily called me one evening while I was folding laundry after work. Her voice sounded nervous. "Mom," she said carefully, "Daniel's family is very formal." I laughed softly. "What does that mean?" "They care a lot about appearances." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. Then finally, she said the thing she had really called to say. "Maybe don't talk too much about the cleaning jobs during the wedding events." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that worked double shifts to pay for her education. The same hands that packed her lunches, held her when she cried, clapped the loudest at every school play. And suddenly, those hands embarrassed her. I felt something crack quietly, inside my chest. But I still answered gently. "Of course, sweetheart." Because sometimes mothers break their own hearts, trying to protect their children's happiness. After the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the silence around me. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to wonder something terrifying. Had my daughter fallen in love with Daniel? Or had she fallen in love with the life she thought he could give her? The wedding venue looked like a palace. White marble floors. Golden chandeliers hanging from ceilings so high they almost disappeared into the light. Fresh orchids everywhere. Soft piano music floating through the air. Everything looked expensive. Perfect. Untouchable. Later, I learned the flower arrangements alone cost more than my entire yearly salary. And somehow, that didn't even surprise me. Because this wedding was never built for people like me. Emily had told me not to buy a new outfit. "Don't waste money, Mom." So I wore the nicest clothes I already owned. A simple cream-colored coat. Carefully ironed. Carefully cleaned. The same shoes I wore to church every Sunday. Nothing fancy. But everything I had. Before leaving home, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. Fixing my hair again and again. Smoothing tiny wrinkles from my coat with trembling hands. Trying so hard to look respectable. Trying to look like a mother worthy of standing beside a successful daughter. And maybe that was my first mistake. Wanting so badly to belong somewhere that never planned to accept me. The moment I entered the lobby, I felt it. The staring. Not direct. Not rude enough to be called rude. But enough. Small glances. Tiny pauses. Eyes moving slowly over my coat. My shoes. My hands. The kind of look wealthy people give when they're silently asking themselves, "Does she belong here?" And suddenly, I became painfully aware of everything. The softness of their clothes. The sparkle of diamonds around their necks. The expensive perfume floating through the room. Meanwhile, I stood there clutching my purse with both hands. Hoping nobody noticed how uncomfortable I felt. Then Daniel appeared. And the second he saw me, his smile disappeared. Just for a second. But long enough. Oh. One word. One tiny word. Yet somehow it carried disappointment. Embarrassment. Annoyance. Like my presence had created a problem. He walked closer and lowered his voice. "Clara, you should have told us what you planned to wear." I blinked slowly. Confused. I wore my best outfit. For a moment, he forced a polite smile. The kind people use when they're trying very hard not to sound cruel. "Yes, well. There are important guests here." Important guests. That sentence landed inside my chest like a stone. I looked directly at him. And I'm not important. For the first time. Daniel had no answer. Before he could speak, Emily arrived. And for one brief moment, nothing else existed. Because she looked beautiful. Radiant. Like the little girl I used to braid hair for before school. Like the little girl who used to run into my arms after nightmares. My daughter. My baby. But then. Her eyes dropped to my coat. And I watched her expression change. The warmth faded. Her jaw tightened slightly. Mom. I waited. I waited for a smile. For a hug. For anything. Instead, she whispered. You could have tried harder. Those words. God. Those words sliced through me. Because I had tried. I had tried so hard. I looked down at my clothes for one horrible second. Seeing myself through their eyes. Cheap. Small. Embarrassing. My throat tightened painfully. I did try, I whispered. Emily sighed softly. The kind of sigh people give during an inconvenience. Daniel's parents are already judging everything. Everything. The flowers. The music. The guests. And apparently. Me too. Then Daniel stepped closer again. Calm. Polite. Cold. We actually arranged a private waiting room for family members who need to. He paused carefully. Freshen up. At first. I didn't understand. Then suddenly. I understood everything. He wasn't helping me. He was hiding me. Hiding me before wealthy guests arrived. Hiding the poor mother. The cleaning woman. The reminder that Emily did not come from their world. And then. He said the sentence I will never forget. Maybe it's better if guests don't see you until the ceremony starts. Silence. Complete silence. I looked at Emily. Waiting. Waiting for her to say something. Anything. Tell him he was wrong. Tell him I was her mother. Tell him I belonged there. But she said nothing. Nothing. And somehow. That silence hurt more than every cruel word combined. Because cruelty from strangers, you survive. You expect it. But silence from your own child. That kind of silence destroys something inside you. And standing there beneath those golden chandeliers. Surrounded by luxury. Surrounded by people pretending to be kind. I had never felt smaller in my entire life. The waiting room was small. Too small. Windowless. Cold. Hidden behind the kitchen hallway like something people weren't supposed to see. Or someone. A single chair sat near the wall. A flickering light buzzed softly above me. And outside that thin door. Life continued beautifully. Laughter echoed from the ballroom. Music floated through the hallways. Champagne glasses clinked softly. People celebrating love. Meanwhile. I sat alone in silence. For nearly 40 minutes. 40 long minutes. No one checked on me. No one asked if I was okay. Not Daniel. Not his family. Not even Emily. And somehow. That hurt more than being hidden. Because being forgotten by strangers is one thing. But being forgotten by your own child. That pain settles somewhere permanent. I sat there staring at my hands. These hands. Rough. Dry. Tired from decades of work. The same hands that once scrubbed nursing home floors until the skin cracked open and bled. The same hands that washed dishes at midnight after double shifts. The same hands that packed Emily's school lunches every morning. Braided her tiny hair before class. Held her through fevers. Wiped tears after heartbreaks. Signed every school permission slip. Applauded at every graduation. These hands built her life. Piece by piece. Sacrifice by sacrifice. I remembered one winter night. Emily was 16. The heating in our apartment stopped working. It was freezing. I gave her every blanket we had and told her I wasn't cold. But later that night, I sat alone in the kitchen wearing gloves because my fingers hurt from the cold so badly I couldn't feel them anymore. She never knew. And I never told her. Because mothers survive quietly. We suffer quietly. We love quietly. I remembered missing meals so she could have textbooks. Working overtime while hiding fevers. Smiling through exhaustion because I didn't want her carrying guilt. And somehow, after all these years, those same hands had become embarrassing. I looked down at them and suddenly wondered something terrifying. Had Emily always been ashamed of me? Or did success slowly teach her how to forget who carried her there? Outside the room, I heard laughter again. Loud. Carefree. And for one painful moment, I imagined Emily smiling out there with everyone else, while her mother sat hidden behind a kitchen hallway like a secret. That thought nearly broke me. Then, a soft knock interrupted the silence. The door opened slowly. An elderly woman stepped inside. Elegant silver hair. Pearl earrings. Graceful posture. But her eyes. Her eyes were kind. Truly kind. Not fake polite. Not performative kindness. Real warmth. I thought you might be lonely in here, she said gently. And those words alone almost made me cry. Because after humiliation, even small kindness feels overwhelming. Her name was Margaret. One of Daniel's distant relatives. She sat beside me quietly. No judgment. No uncomfortable staring. Just presence. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she glanced toward the ballroom and sighed softly. They're obsessed with appearances, she whispered. I let out a tired little laugh. You noticed? Margaret smiled sadly. My dear. I've spent my entire life around wealthy people. Then her expression changed. The truly wealthy don't humiliate others. She paused. Only insecure people do that. Something inside me cracked hearing those words. Because all day, I had been wondering if maybe I did deserve the humiliation. If maybe I really looked too poor. Too small. Too wrong for this world. But Margaret spoke to me like I mattered. Like I was human. And suddenly I realized how starved I had become for simple dignity. My eyes burned instantly. I looked away quickly, embarrassed by my emotions. But Margaret pretended not to notice. That kind of mercy is rare. She asked about Emily. And before I realized it, the words just started pouring out. The overtime shifts. The nights without sleep. The years I spent cleaning rooms while dreaming of a better future for my daughter. I told her how Emily used to wait by the apartment window for me to come home from work. How she once hugged me tightly at 8 years old and whispered, when I grow up, I'm gonna take care of you forever, Mommy. God. That memory hurt. Because children mean those promises when they make them. Until the world changes them. Margaret listened silently the entire time. No interruption. No pity. Just understanding. Then finally, very softly, she asked, does your daughter know? I looked down at my trembling hands. She knows enough, I whispered. But deep inside, for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure anymore. The ceremony was beautiful. At least, on the outside. Soft violin music echoed through the hall. Candles flickered like tiny stars. Guests smiled through emotional tears. And Emily, my little girl, walked down the aisle looking absolutely radiant. For one brief moment, watching her in that white dress, I forgot everything. The humiliation. The waiting room. The cruel whispers. Everything. Because no matter how broken a mother feels, seeing her child happy still softens her heart. Daniel stood at the altar smiling proudly. Photographers flashed cameras constantly. Every second captured. Every smile preserved. Everything looked perfect. But perfection is dangerous. Because sometimes, the most beautiful things hide rot underneath. After the vows, guests moved into the grand ballroom for dinner. Crystal chandeliers glowed above polished tables. Champagne poured endlessly. Soft laughter filled the air. Meanwhile, I stayed near the back of the room. Quiet. Invisible. Exactly where they wanted me. I noticed how servers moved around me more warmly than the guests did. At least workers recognize other workers. At least they see you. Then suddenly, a spoon tapped gently against a glass. The room quieted instantly. Daniel's father stood slowly. Richard Collins. Millionaire. Powerful. Respected. The kind of man newspapers call self-made. Though men like him are usually built from other people's exhaustion. Other people's labor. Other people's sacrifices. He adjusted his expensive cufflinks. Lifted a champagne glass. And smiled confidently. To family, he announced. The guests applauded immediately. To legacy. Another pause. To refinement. More applause. And to the joining of two worlds. The ballroom filled with clapping. Elegant laughter. Polite admiration. But something about his voice unsettled me. Because every word sounded rehearsed. Calculated. Like he wasn't giving a speech. He was making a statement. Then he turned toward Emily. We are delighted to welcome Emily into a family of excellence. Excellence. That word lingered heavily in the air. And then, his eyes shifted toward me. Only briefly. Just one glance. But long enough. Long enough for me to understand everything. This had never been about my clothes. Or my coat. Or whether I fit the dress code. It was about class. Status. Power. It was about deciding who deserves dignity. And who should remain grateful just to be tolerated. I lowered my eyes quietly. Suddenly aware of every wrinkle in my coat. Every rough line on my hands. Every year of exhaustion written across my body. The applause slowly faded. Then unexpectedly, Daniel stood up and reached for the microphone. My stomach tightened instantly. I'd also like to thank everyone who helped make this elegant evening possible. Elegant. Again with that word. Elegant. As if elegance was something only money could buy. As if kindness had nothing to do with it. Daniel laughed softly. The kind of laugh people use before saying something cruel disguised as humor. We had a few small challenges blending very different backgrounds. Several guests chuckled politely. Tiny laughs. Controlled laughs. The kind rich people make when they don't want to appear rude. While still enjoying the insult. I looked toward Emily. Her smile had faded slightly. She looked uncomfortable. Nervous. Ashamed. But she still said nothing. And somehow, that silence hurt more every single time. Then Daniel continued. But thankfully, he smiled proudly toward Emily. Emily has worked very hard to rise above difficult circumstances. The room laughed again. Not loudly. Not viciously. Worse. Softly. Comfortably. Like humiliating someone poor was completely normal. My chest tightened painfully. Because suddenly, I understood exactly what this was. He wasn't just insulting me. No. He was presenting himself as the hero. The successful man who rescued my daughter from embarrassment. From poverty. From me. And the terrifying part. Everyone in that room understood the message perfectly. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. But I refused to cry. Not there. Not in front of people who mistook cruelty for sophistication. I sat perfectly still while laughter echoed around me. And memories flooded my mind all at once. Emily at 6 years old. Sleeping beside me because thunderstorms scared her. Emily at 10. Crying because kids teased her old backpack. Emily at 17. Hugging me tightly after receiving her college acceptance letter. We made it, Mom, she had whispered through tears. We made it. Not I made it. We. Back then. She used to look at me with pride. So what happened? At what point did my sacrifices become something she needed to erase? I looked around the ballroom again. At the diamonds. The champagne. The polished smiles. And suddenly, I felt tired. Not angry. Not devastated. Just tired. Because in that moment, something inside me finally cracked. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like glass breaking underwater. I realized I had spent my entire life protecting Emily from pain. Protecting her from struggle. Protecting her from shame. But maybe, without meaning to, I had also protected her from gratitude. There was something no one in that ballroom knew. Not Daniel. Not his parents. Not even Emily. 3 years earlier, I had inherited money. A lot of money. My uncle Theodore had died unexpectedly. He had no children. And despite barely speaking for years, he left me everything. Nearly $3 million. At first I thought there had been a mistake. But there wasn't. Theodore had secretly followed my life from a distance. He knew how hard I worked. And in his final letter, he wrote, "You spent your entire life giving. Now let life finally give something back to you." I never told Emily. Why? Because I wanted to know whether love still existed without money. Whether people would value me before discovering wealth. I continued living simply. Continued working. Continued dressing modestly. And now, sitting in that ballroom, I realized I had finally received my answer. No. They didn't value me. Not really. Not when they believed I was poor. Then the wedding planner approached our table nervously. "There's an issue with the final venue payment." Richard frowned immediately. "What issue?" "The transfer hasn't cleared." Daniel looked confused. "I thought your office handled it." Richard's face darkened. "There's a temporary banking complication." The planner lowered her voice. "The venue manager says payment must be completed tonight or service stops immediately." Panic spread across their table. Guests began whispering. Emily looked horrified. The Collins family reputation was everything to them. And suddenly, that perfect image was cracking. Then something unexpected happened. I stood up. Slowly. Quietly. And walked toward the planner. "I can handle the payment," I said. Daniel stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Richard actually laughed. "With what?" The ballroom went silent. Every eye turned toward me. I reached into my old handbag, pulled out a black card, and handed it to the planner. The room froze. Because even rich people recognize certain cards. And they knew instantly. That card didn't belong to a poor cleaning woman. The wedding planner looked stunned. Completely stunned. She stared at the card in her hands. Then at me. Then back at the card again. For a moment, she looked like her mind couldn't connect the two things together. The poor woman in the simple coat. And the account balance sitting in front of her. Then suddenly, her entire posture changed. "Yes, ma'am," she said quickly. "Ma'am." That word almost made me laugh. Because only minutes earlier, I had been invisible. Hidden. Embarrassing. And now I was, "Ma'am." Funny how quickly respect appears. Once money enters the room. Within minutes, everything changed. The payment issue disappeared immediately. The venue manager rushed over personally, apologizing over and over with nervous sweat gathering near his forehead. Staff members who barely looked at me before now smiled too much, spoke too politely, offered me drinks, chairs, desserts. As if kindness could suddenly be purchased retroactively. But I wasn't watching them. No. I was watching Emily. And my daughter looked completely lost. Like the ground beneath her had disappeared. "Mom." Her voice trembled. "What is happening?" I looked at her quietly. Calmly. And for the first time all night, I stopped trying to protect her feelings. "The truth," I said softly. The ballroom had gone nearly silent now. People whispering. Watching. Judging. But differently this time. Not because I looked poor. Because they realized they may have treated the wrong person badly. Daniel stepped forward suddenly. Confused. Tense. "You have money." I stared at him. And something inside me went cold. Because that was his first question. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Why didn't you tell us?" Not even, "I'm sorry." Just, "You have money." Money. That's when I truly saw him. Not the polished smile. Not the expensive suit. Not the charming voice. I saw the emptiness underneath it all. And once you truly see someone, you can never unsee them. I explained the inheritance briefly. A distant relative. Property investments. Money left quietly in my name years ago. Enough to live comfortably. Enough that I never needed anyone's approval. Gasps spread softly across the ballroom. Tiny whispers exploded across the tables. I watched Richard Collins carefully. And right there, in front of everyone, his entire personality changed. Suddenly he smiled warmly. Suddenly his tone softened. Suddenly I was no longer an embarrassment. "Clara," he said smoothly, as if we were old friends. "Clara. Interesting. Hours ago I was someone they wanted hidden in a back room. Now suddenly I deserved a first name." Then he lifted a champagne glass toward me. "We're family after all." Family. The word felt disgusting in his mouth. Not because of greed. Greed is common. No. What disgusted me was how quickly the mask changed. How quickly cruelty transformed into respect. The second wealth entered the conversation. And around the room, I could see it happening everywhere. People smiling differently at me now. Looking at me longer. Listening more carefully. As if money had suddenly made me intelligent. Valuable. Human. Emily looked close to tears. Real tears. You never told me, she whispered. And for a second, I saw the little girl inside her again. Confused. Heartbroken. Ashamed. But my own heart was too tired now. Too bruised. I wanted to know whether I mattered without it. The words landed hard. I saw it instantly in her face. Like something sharp had pierced through years of denial. Because deep down, she knew. She knew exactly how she had treated me. Then quietly, I asked her the question that had been breaking me all night. Did I? Silence. Emily opened her mouth. But no words came out. Because some questions are too honest to escape from. Some questions force people to stand face to face with who they've become. Tears gathered in her eyes. But still, she couldn't answer. And honestly, that hurt more than if she had screamed at me. Because the silence told me everything. Then suddenly, a chair moved softly across the ballroom. Margaret stood. Elegant. Calm. Unshaken. And in front of everyone. She spoke clearly. A mother should never have to prove her worth to her own child. Silence. Heavy silence. No music. No laughter. No clinking glasses. Nothing. And for the first time that night, the ballroom no longer looked beautiful to me. The chandeliers felt cold. The flowers felt fake. The luxury suddenly looked empty. Because money had done something terrifying. It had exposed everyone. The greedy. The cruel. The insecure. The performative kindness. The conditional respect. All of it. And standing there in the middle of that glittering ballroom, I realized something painful. They never hated me because I was poor. They hated me because they believed I would always stay beneath them. And the moment that illusion shattered, so did theirs. Later that night, Emily found me standing alone outside near the garden terrace. Cold wind moved softly through the flowers. The distant wedding music echoed behind us. Muted laughter drifted through the open ballroom doors. But out there, beneath the night sky, everything felt strangely quiet. I stood near the railing staring at the city lights. Trying to breathe. Trying to hold together the pieces of my heart that had been breaking all day. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Small. Unsteady. I turned slowly. And there she was. My daughter. Crying. Not graceful tears. Not the kind women wipe away carefully to protect their makeup. No. This was real crying. The kind that shakes your shoulders. The kind that steals your breath. The kind that comes from guilt you can no longer outrun. Mom. Her voice cracked instantly. And suddenly, for one painful second, I remembered her at 5 years old after falling off her bicycle. The exact same trembling voice. The exact same tears. Only this time, I couldn't protect her from the pain. Because she had created it herself. I'm sorry, she whispered. I looked at her quietly. Not angry. Not cold. Just tired. So unbelievably tired. For what exactly? The question hung heavily between us. Because vague apologies are easy. People say I'm sorry every day. But specific truth. That's harder. Specific truth forces people to face themselves. Emily wiped at her tears desperately. For being ashamed of you, she admitted. Each word sounded painful coming out of her mouth. For caring what people thought. Another shaky breath. For letting them disrespect you. I nodded slowly. And even hearing the apology, my chest still hurt. Because some wounds don't disappear the moment someone finally admits they hurt you. I looked at her carefully beneath the terrace lights. And then I asked the question that had lived silently inside me for years. When did you start seeing me as someone you needed to hide? Emily broke instantly. She covered her face and sobbed harder. I don't know. But deep down, I think she did know. It hadn't happened all at once. People rarely become cruel overnight. It happens slowly. Quietly. Piece by piece. First comes insecurity. Then ambition. Then the desperate need for acceptance. And eventually, people start trading pieces of their soul for approval. I remembered the first expensive purse Emily bought after law school. The first time she corrected my grammar in public. The first time she looked embarrassed when I hugged her too tightly around wealthy people. Tiny moments. Small changes. Almost invisible. Until one day, your child looks at you like you belong to a life they're trying to escape. Emily looked up at me desperately. Her mascara stained. Her face red from crying. And suddenly she didn't look like a polished lawyer anymore. She looked young. Lost. Please don't leave, she whispered. That sentence nearly destroyed me. Because mothers spend their whole lives terrified of losing their children. And somehow, children rarely realize that parents fear abandonment too. I turned slowly toward the ballroom. The giant windows glowed with golden light. Music still floated through the air. Guests still laughed inside. Pretending perfection existed. But now, all I could see was emptiness. Fake smiles. Conditional respect. Love attached to status. And for the first time all night, I realized how lonely that world truly was. Then I looked back at my daughter. My child. The little girl I once carried home asleep in my arms. The little girl who used to wait by the apartment door every evening just to hug me after work. And my voice softened. I spent your entire life making sacrifices so you could become successful. Emily lowered her eyes instantly. But somewhere along the way, my throat tightened painfully. I forgot to teach you that success without kindness. I paused. Because even saying the words hurt is emptiness. Emily sobbed harder. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just broken. The kind of crying that comes when someone finally sees the damage they've caused. And for the first time that entire day, I saw my little girl again. Not the ambitious lawyer. Not the woman desperate to impress wealthy people. Not the bride standing beneath crystal chandeliers pretending everything was perfect. Just my daughter. Broken. Ashamed. Human. And standing there beneath the cold night sky, I realized something heartbreaking. Children don't stop loving their parents when they change. Sometimes, they just lose themselves trying to become someone the world will approve of. Inside the ballroom, the celebration continued. At least technically. The music still played softly. Champagne still flowed. Waiters still moved between tables carrying silver trays. But something had changed. You could feel it. The air no longer felt joyful. It felt tense. Heavy. Like everyone in the room suddenly realized the perfect wedding they admired only moments ago was quietly falling apart. Guests whispered behind raised glasses. Eyes followed us everywhere. Tiny judgmental conversations spread from table to table. Because wealthy circles love scandal almost as much as they love status. And tonight, this wedding had become entertainment. I stood beside Emily near the edge of the ballroom. She looked emotionally exhausted. Like years of pressure were finally collapsing all at once. Then Daniel approached us carefully. Slower than before. Less confident. For the first time all evening. He looked nervous. "Emily," he said softly. "Everyone's waiting." Waiting. Such a small sentence. But I realized he still cared more about appearances than pain. More about the guests than the woman standing in front of him falling apart emotionally. Emily looked at him quietly. Really looked at him. And something shifted in her face. Almost like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the polished charm. Not the expensive suit. Not the powerful family name. Just the man underneath it all. Then she asked softly. "When your family thought my mother was poor?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Would you ever have respected her?" Silence. Daniel froze. And then. He hesitated. Just for 1 second. But sometimes 1 second is enough to expose an entire truth. Because honest people answer immediately. Only guilty people search for safer words. And that hesitation answered everything. I watched Emily's face carefully. And I swear. You could actually see her heart breaking in real time. Not because she lost a wedding. Because she realized the love she trusted may have always been conditional. She stepped backward slowly. Like she suddenly needed distance to breathe. "I need time," she whispered. Immediately Richard Collins stepped forward. Cold. Controlled. Annoyed. "This is not the moment for emotional drama." Emotional drama. Interesting phrase. Men like him always call accountability drama. Especially when consequences finally arrive. Emily looked at him slowly. And for the first time that night. She didn't look intimidated anymore. She looked awake. Painfully awake. Then. With trembling fingers. She reached for her wedding ring. The ballroom went completely silent. Even the music suddenly felt distant. I watched her slide the ring off slowly. The diamond catching the chandelier light one last time. Gasps echoed across the room. Someone dropped a fork nearby. Daniel's face lost all color. "You can't be serious." But Emily's expression changed completely now. Calm. Steady. Almost heartbreakingly mature. "I spent years trying to fit into your world," she said quietly. No yelling. No drama. Just truth. And tonight. She swallowed hard. "I realized your world only respects people with money." Her eyes filled again. Not character. A pause. Not sacrifice. Another painful breath. Not love. The silence afterward felt enormous. Because everyone in that ballroom knew she was right. And the worst part about truth. Even people who hate it can still recognize it. Then Emily turned toward me. And suddenly. She didn't look like a bride anymore. She looked like my daughter again. Scared. Honest. Human. "I became someone I don't recognize," she whispered. That sentence nearly shattered me. Because parents spend years worrying the world will hurt their children. But nobody warns you that sometimes the world changes them first. For a moment nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The chandeliers still sparkled above us. The flowers still smelled sweet. The luxury still surrounded the room. But now it all felt empty. Like a beautiful shell with nothing alive inside it. Then Emily reached for my hand. Slowly. Carefully. The exact same way she used to when she was little and afraid to cross busy streets. And the second her hand touched mine, I felt it. My little girl was still there somewhere. Buried beneath ambition. Buried beneath insecurity. Buried beneath years of trying to earn acceptance from people who would never truly love her. Tears filled her eyes again. "I'm sorry, Mom." This time. I believed her. I squeezed her hand gently. Not because everything was magically fixed. It wasn't. Some wounds take years to heal. But love. Real love. Sometimes survives even the ugliest moments. And together. Without another word. We walked toward the ballroom doors. Past the whispering guests. Past the frozen smiles. Past the people who confused wealth with worth. Nobody stopped us. Nobody knew what to say. And as the cold night air touched our faces outside. For the first time all evening. I could finally breathe again. We walked away from the chandeliers. Away from the fake perfection. Away from the people who measured human value through money and status. And for the first time in years. We weren't pretending anymore. Not rich. Not poor. Just. Free. People always think endings happen dramatically. But real healing is quiet. Slow. Awkward. 6 months after the wedding, Emily moved into a small apartment downtown. Nothing luxurious. Nothing performative. Just honest. She left Daniel completely. The newspapers called it a mysterious cancelled wedding. But the truth was simpler. A woman finally realized she was losing herself. Emily started volunteering at legal aid clinics. Helping women who couldn't afford lawyers. Sometimes she worked 12-hour days for almost no money. But she smiled more. Really smiled. One evening she visited my apartment carrying groceries. And while unpacking them she suddenly said, "I used to think success meant being accepted by rich people." I listened quietly. But now I think success is becoming someone you're not ashamed of. I felt tears sting my eyes. Because growth is rare. True growth is even rarer. Then Emily handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a framed photograph. An old picture of us from years ago. I was wearing my nursing home uniform. Emily was maybe 10 years old. And written beneath the frame were the words, "She built my future with tired hands." That was the moment I finally forgave her. Not because she apologized. But because she changed. And real change is one of the hardest things a human being can do. Never be ashamed of the people who sacrificed for you. The hands that worked hardest for your future may not look elegant. But they are often the most beautiful hands in the room. Because character matters more than status. And love matters more than appearances. Sometimes the poorest looking person in the room carries the richest heart. And sometimes the people obsessed with looking important are the emptiest of all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Have you ever seen someone judged unfairly because of their appearance or financial status? Tell us your story in the comments. And remember, never disrespect the person who struggled so you could stand taller.